Welcome back, everybody. It's the Fantasy Pros Dynasty Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Bogman. Follow me on the Twitter at Bogman Sports. I'm joined, as always, by Pat Fitzmaurice at Fitz_FF on the Twitter machine. Fitzy,
doing great,
how you doing, man?
Giddy with anticipation about the draft. We are now a week away, and it's high time to get it on. I mean, a few days to make it through before we get there, but yeah, I'm getting pretty fired up, and fired up to have a great guest this week.
That's right. Russell Brown of Fantasy Pros joins us, the NFL Draft analyst. Follow him on the Twitter at Russ NFL Draft. Russell, welcome. Thank you for coming on and talking some NFL Draft. And I bet you're excited to get this rocking and rolling too, right?
Oh, absolutely. I appreciate you guys for letting me, come in here, talk a little football and just have a lot of fun. But yeah, no, I'm excited for next week. It's like, you're starting to get bottled up with the emotion and excitement about it. And it's feeling like a kid on Christmas. And my wife already knows the drill. She's already texting friends. She's like, Russell told me for 3 days, don't look at him, don't talk to him, don't smell him, don't do anything. So like, she knows the drill. We got protocols coming in play. So she's going to probably leave next week, and we'll be doing a lot of live stuff, and I'm excited about it.
This is stricter than COVID protocols. All right.
Exactly.
This is NFL draft protocols. All right. Stay out of the man cave. We're watching the draft. We're evaluating. Leave me alone.
Yep.
I
cold beer. Leave me
that.
alone. Exactly.
That's right. That's right. I'm going to do like Charlie and Always Sunny. I'm sitting here, I'm relaxing, and you're leaving me alone.
Exactly.
Yeah, that is funny. Can you remember, I'm going to throw a curveball at you here. Do you remember like your first NFL draft, like either excitement, disappointment, like how old were you? What team was it? Which prospect was it? Whatever it was. What was your like first enjoyment or hatred of the NFL draft when your team did something right or wrong?
2000, was it 2 or 2003? I'm a Lions fan. I'm from Michigan, so I have that going for me. But I remember in 2002, 2003, Joey Harrington was on the cover of NCAA. It was like, okay, this guy's the real deal. The Lions took him like second or third overall. We thought we had our quarterback. We ended up taking Calvin Johnson, Roy Williams, Mike Williams, and it just never worked out. But I just remember taking him, and I was so excited. And like, I remember previous NFL drafts. Like I remember when the Lions took Terry Fair rather than Randy Moss, but like, it's very, it's not fully in my brain, right? Like, but
right.
The 2002, 2003 one was when it like really started to hit. And then obviously with the Lions always being bad, the draft's been my Super Bowl, and it's been what I've been most passionate about for 20 plus years. So it's been, it's been awesome for the last 10 years covering it. And obviously, doing this one with you guys this year and hopefully many more after is really exciting.
Fitz, it's always fun. Do you have that moment too of the NFL draft where you're like, oh, the Packers got so-and-so or didn't take so-and-so? Do you have any of that?
What was the year that Bill Polian got really mad at Mel Kiper for criticizing?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that was in the 80s, wasn't it?
That
was
one
that
I remember well. Like, I mean,
yeah.
I've been watching, I hate to, date myself.
Was that Trent Dilfer?
No, man.
Was that because they didn't take Trent Dilfer? They were like,
maybe
this
that's
is why the Colts
wanted.
That was Mel Kiper. Yeah. Typical Colts move.
Yeah,
I remember him saying that. Yeah.
God, I can probably remember going back to like the very early 80s, watching some of those old ones on ESPN where, they go to the tables and like their ashtrays and guys like smoking. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And like, just a few like crazed Jets fans like up in the rafters, like, booing whoever the Jets, like those old days were the best, man. And I'm kind of jealous of Russell this, like as a Lions fan this year with the Lions having 4 picks in the first 2 rounds. I mean, you got to be giddy about what the first couple of days are going to look like.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's funny too. Like I do a lot of radio stuff and different podcasts. People always ask me the Lions stuff. They're like, hey, we know you're a Lions fan. What do you want them to do? And like, for the first time in my life, I'm like, I really don't care what we do in these first 4 picks. Like take good football players. Like that's literally it, because they can use anybody. And really, I think the only thing that I would be upset about is at 6 if they drafted a receiver, because I don't think there's a receiver worth taking at 6. But if they took one at 18, I could understand it. If they took one on day 2, I could understand it. But yeah, I'm pumped. And, doing some stuff with the Lions Wire with USA Today as well. Like being able to kind of do both with the draft with us at Fantasy Pros and then that stuff. It's just, I'm going to be knee deep in content next week, and I can't wait.
Let me ask you something
fun,
real
man.
quick, Russell. This is sort of, off the show sheet, but considering where the Lions are at, and like the needle is definitely pointing up for the Lions, and they're probably not going to be in a position to be able to get a top tier quarterback in the NFL draft anytime soon, because I don't expect to see them drafting top 10 again for a while. What do you think about the possibility of them maybe going for like Anthony Richardson if he's still there with their 6th pick, and sort of planning for, a post-Goff future, and, the guy who could maybe take them to the promised land when their roster's where they want it to be in a year or two?
Yeah, it's possible, right? Like it's very possible. I think it could happen. I think they would definitely be interested in improving the position. They've made that very clear during this offseason. And I'm okay with Anthony Richardson. I know a lot of people are like, I don't want him. He's going to be a bust. And it's like, well, you're not watching him move in the pocket. You're not really seeing the arm strength. You're looking past all that, and you're only looking at the bad throws. There's a lot of good on tape with him. So he would make sense to be the guy there at 6, just because he could sit behind Goff. He could get some polishing. And maybe in 2 years when Goff is gone, that's your guy. I'm for it. I'm totally for it. And you look at your team, the Packers, they had to make that decision with Jordan Love. They brought in a guy that sure, maybe isn't, got the same skill set as Anthony Richardson, but they had to pull the trigger on that position as well. And the Lions could be faced with that same thing, but it does feel like Goff is their guy. So I wouldn't be surprised if they just went defense at 6. So we'll kind of see how it plays out, but I'm not opposed to AR at all. He's awesome.
How many times in your Lions watching life, Russ, have you heard a Packers fan say, "I'm jealous of the Lions fan"?
Never.
Was that a
it's
first?
A first. That's a first.
We might have gotten a first ever on this podcast live. So I just wanted to mention that to everyone. I thought that was a little passive aggressive from Pat here, but just show him your trophies, Pat.
Well,
it's okay.
After they knocked us out of the playoffs last year, I think that's probably not the first time the Lions are going to be inflicting misery, or not the last time they're going to be inflicting misery on the Packers in the years to come.
It's all cyclical. It's all cyclical unless you're a Browns fan. Then it's just a straight line. But before we get into the meat here, I got to tell you guys, I just want to mention that we're going to be covering the first round of the NFL draft live on the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel, youtube.com/Fantasy Pros. If you're watching this, you're on there now. So coverage begins at 7 p.m. Eastern on Thursday, April 27th. So we will be live for the draft. It won't be me. I think Pat might be making an appearance on day one. We know, of course, Joe and Andrew will. So, just check it out. It's going to be a lot of fun, and you'll get instant reaction from the FP crew here during the draft. But let's dive in here, Russell and Fitz. I'm going to set you up because you have the first QB.
All right, Russell. Yeah. In addition to the Anthony Richardson take, I was kind of curious, like if you were the general manager of the Panthers, what would you do with the number 1 pick? Which quarterback would you go for?
I mean, I would go with Bryce Young. He's the best quarterback in the draft, in my opinion. And with what it sounds like, how they're going to be building that offense with a lot of RPO style stuff, I think that's what Bryce Young is going to be best suited to do at the next level. And I understand the concerns with the weight and the overall frame and how he can withstand contact at the next level. But when we watch him play, I mean, he is a point guard. And I said that back in January, February. He plays it like Steph Curry. He's going to drive to the lane. You think he's going to run it, and then all of a sudden he goes laterally and he makes an impressive throw off platform, and he can make every single throw. So I love the skill set with him, and I think he's somebody that when you watch him in interviews, he's very calm, cool, and collected, very poised, and he seems ready for the big stage. And I don't have to worry about him not showing up or saying something out of line. Like he seems committed to the game, and he just seems like the franchise guy. So that would be the direction I go. Ultimately, I think that's the direction they go next week. And obviously we'll see what happens, but I think that's the right pick, and they need a guy that can play right away. I think Bryce Young can.
I thought it was smoke. I honestly thought it was smoke. I thought they were trying to squeeze that extra, pick back out of Houston or something with all the Bryce Young talk, because we knew the Texans love Bryce Young. But looks like Lovey really did curse them, and they'll be stuck with their second option on the board there. Russ, I want to know what your pre-draft. Obviously, landing spot is going to change a bunch for these guys, but in a super flex draft, fantasy draft right now, what would your top 5 picks be as of this second before the draft?
Yeah, I mean, Bryce Young would be, probably the number 1 pick. He just makes so much sense for all the reasons that I just talked about. Probably CJ Stroud after that, just because I think overall landing spot, he's going to go to a place where he should play right away. I think the team that makes the most sense if he ends up getting there is Ford, Indianapolis, and I think he would play right away. Bijan Robinson, obviously out of Texas. There's so much to like with him. I think he's a top 10 pick next week, and I think a team like Philadelphia at 10 would make a lot of sense. I even think Atlanta at 8 would make a lot of sense, and I would certainly keep tabs on Chicago at 9. I think one of those 3 teams could be very interested in him. I am curious if Brad Holmes and the Detroit Lions end up pulling the trigger on Bijan at 6, just simply because of he was a part of the regime in LA when they took Todd Gurley at 10 a few years ago. And I think this is a team that values the running back position. And they, last year, the Lions, during the season, they traded away TJ Hawkinson midseason. I wouldn't be surprised if they dangled that carrot with DeAndre Swift during the year.
Yeah.
And we see something
maybe even during the draft if they're going to take Bijan, right?
Exactly. So I think that there's going to be some interesting moves made, and I could see that potentially being the fit. But outside of that, I'm going to throw Michael Mayer in there. I think no matter where he goes, he's going to be a top tight end. And when I look at him, I don't know if he goes to a team like Green Bay. That's not really what they do. But if he ended up going there, I think that's where he could have the most success right away, because they don't have any tight ends on the roster outside of, I think, Josiah DeGuara, if I remember correctly. And I think at that point, you get a guy that is going to be steady Eddie, like Chris Olave. When he came out last year, I said he's going to be 5 for 75 every single week. I think that's going to be the same type of deal here with Mayer, 5 for 60, and it's going to be consistent across the board. And then just lastly, throwing a flyer out there, I'm going to say Zach Charbonnet out of UCLA. I would be really curious where he lands. I think as a day 2 pick, you can get, some really good value there. And I think teams that, are in the first round, like I mentioned, Atlanta, potentially Chicago, or even Philadelphia, they have that need for the running back position. Maybe they don't spend the day 1 premium for it. Maybe they do it on day 2. But if Charbonnet ends up going to a place like that, I think he could be a top back in a backfield somewhere.
I got to follow up on that then. Fitz, that's Charbonnet over Gibbs. It's not like the hottest take ever, but I think most people have Gibbs as a number 2 back on their board. You would take Charbonnet over him?
Gibbs is still ranked higher on my board, but I think overall, like with landing spot, like if Jahmyr Gibbs ends up going somewhere in the first round, let's say he goes to New Orleans or he ends up going to Kansas City, he might get buried a little bit on a depth chart. Not saying he won't get featured at all, but if he's only going to catch me 40 passes out of the backfield and I'm potentially not even in a PPR type league or something like that, then it's kind of dangerous. So
higher chance to get relegated for him than it is for Charbonnet. Is that
exactly?
Is that
that's what I think.
That's an interesting point. And I know Boggs said Thor Nystrom, our own Thor Nystrom, does have Charbonnet ahead of Gibbs in his running back rankings. So
yeah, it feels like that is it's not crazy. I think a month ago it would have been crazy. Everyone was like, what? You got Charbonnet over Gibbs? Now it's like, I think people are digging a little deeper and seeing what Charbonnet does and seeing that he's a complete back and going. So I still have Gibbs ahead of him, just to peel the curtain back there, but I do have Charbonnet in his own tier. So like it's Bijan. It's really the top 3 are in their own tier to me. It's Bijan and then Gibbs and then Charbonnet. And then I have a big chunk of like 4 to 5 guys after that. So I'm not that. I mean, Charbonnet is a great back. And if he lands in the right situation, like Dameon Pierce did last year, where Dameon Pierce was a number 2 on anyone's board last year as far as running backs go before the draft. After the draft, he goes to Houston where they don't have a quarterback. The offensive line is pretty bad. and they don't have any running backs. It's Rex Burkhead, and you go, whoa, well, let's go ahead and crank Dameon Pierce on up in our rankings here. Same exact thing could happen for Charbonnet if he lands in a spot that is good for him. And, I think if you put Charbonnet and Gibbs in that same spot, I would still say Charbonnet would have more carries. Like if they're both in, the same backfield, I would say Charbonnet gets more carries because he's a bigger bruiser, obviously more explosion from Gibbs and higher potential in a PPR league, which is what I play in a lot, which is why I probably have Gibbs slightly ahead of Charbonnet. Yeah. But obviously preference goes there. So my main point wasn't even to talk about Charbonnet in that 5. I wanted to see where you had Richardson or Levis. We talked about Richardson a little bit already. I mean, I just think that Richardson has the highest ceiling of any QB in this draft. So I'm probably going to have him just for fantasy rank number 1 in a dynasty league. In a redraft league, I don't know if he starts this year, obviously. So I'll definitely have Young and Stroud ahead of him because they seem pretty locked. How far back would Richardson be on there in your first round pre-draft? And is Will Levis close, or is he just far away?
I think Stroud and Richardson would be somewhere in that top 10, or maybe just a pick or two outside of that top 10. It really just depends on landing spot for the two of them. I think that's why Bryce Young would be at 1, because we feel like we know where he's going to go. But if Richardson goes to potentially Las Vegas, he might sit for a whole year. Now, obviously, we know the point of the dynasty is for long term, so right. You might be willing to take him at 6 or 7, but at that point, I think that would be the earliest he would go, in my opinion, at 6 or 7. And Levis, it would just depend on Stroud. I mean, if Levis ends up going to like Tennessee, or maybe even if he ends up going to Houston at 12, maybe that would bump him up a little bit, because I think he would be the better quarterback on either one of those rosters. But it just really depends on landing spots. So if it's a place where he could play potentially right away, he'd be in the top 10 for me. If not, then it would probably be just outside, like at 11, 12, maybe 13.
Man, if Tennessee drafts a QB, I haven't seen a quarterback lose more steam than Malik Willis outside of maybe Josh Rosen, right? Like fast, just out and drummed out. But all right, interesting answers here. What do we got, Fitzy?
One
What's
quarterback
next?
In this top group we haven't talked about yet, Russell, is Hendon Hooker, and it seems like there's an interesting and wide range of possibilities as far as where he could land in the draft. What do you think is like the earliest that Hooker could possibly go? Because now we're seeing him start to get mocked pretty consistently in the first round, but like, could we be surprised and maybe he winds up being a top 20 pick or even higher?
I think top 20 is possible. In my mock 2.0 for Fantasy Pros, I put him at 12 to Houston. I think it's a very interesting landing spot. If he's not ready to go by the start of the year, they still have Davis Mills. I'm not saying he's the above all be all. We all know kind of what he is. But if it buys you 3, 4, 5 weeks, do we really think the Houston Texans are going to be competing for the division this coming year anyways? Probably not. So I think he makes some sense there at 12. But if you go further down the board, I mean, I would be curious if the Washington Commanders would consider him. I know they seem to be invested in Sam Howell, but could they, be blowing some smoke there? Would they be interested? I think Seattle at 20 would make some sense. And even Tampa Bay at 19. I think Tampa Bay at 19 with the quarterback, with the room that they have. We know what Baker is. We don't really know what Kyle Trask is, but I don't trust that fit and as the long-term answer. So if these teams wanted to add some quarterback competition, that's I think what they need to do. And I think in that top 20, there's just a lot of landing spots. And even if you look at Detroit at 18, if they pass at 6, they've done a lot of research on Hendon Hooker. I know that for a fact, especially down at the Senior Bowl, and they seem to kind of be enamored with him. So maybe that's their guy at 18, and it really wouldn't surprise me if a team maybe even tries to trade up to get him, like maybe a Baltimore. If they can't resolve this stuff with Lamar Jackson, they don't feel like they can do it, maybe they move up a couple spots. You never know.
Yeah, I mean, if Aaron Rodgers falls through, the Jets could be in play for a QB too. Like, there's tons of stuff still unanswered at this point. I feel bad. I know, Russ, you don't feel bad for the Packers at all, but like
No.
they've been hamstrung by Aaron Rodgers this whole offseason. They haven't been able to make any moves at all. Like, I went through before free agency and I made a list of like what each team needs and what they need to get done. And the only one with almost all red still is the Packers, because we haven't seen any answers there. But what's the farthest Hendon Hooker could fall, do you think, Russ?
I mean, I would be surprised if he fell out of the first round, but if he did, I mean, he would have to be a top 40 pick at some point. I just feel like the teams in the back end, I'm going to pull up the draft order, just looking. I mean, the Rams at 36 would kind of be intriguing, just maybe as insurance to Matthew Stafford with all the injuries that he's had. If Seattle passes on a quarterback, at 5 and 20, could he be the guy there at 37? If the Raiders pass on a QB at 7, I think, the Raiders at 38 make a lot of sense. But there's just been so many teams in the top, in the first round that have done the research on them. I mean, the New York Giants have visited with them. I believe the Saints have visited with them, and the Saints have picked 29 and then 40. So I think he gets somewhere in that first round just because of the fifth year option and getting him off the knee and all that stuff.
It's a little bit it's been a rise to the first round for Hooker the last couple weeks. It feels like 3 weeks. It's been like that. But I think what we need to remember is that you want to take a quarterback in the first round, even if you're trading up into the first round to get him, because you get that extra year option to keep him off of his rookie contract. So if you get him in the second round, you can only guarantee his contract through 4 seasons. You can add a 5th if you take him as a first rounder. So a team taking a quarterback might try to slide up or maybe even slide back in the draft in the first round to get him, just to add that extra year in case he does work out as a franchise level QB. So just keep that in mind as we've seen this rise from Hooker over the last 3 weeks. That would be the main reason why I think he would go in the back end of the first, is to add that extra year. So, but before we move on, I got to tell you guys, subscribe to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel and comment below this video, because when you do, you can win a free FREE upgrade to Fantasy Pros Premium. Whether you're looking for custom mock drafts, salary cap draft tools, or in-depth analysis of your fantasy performance, Fantasy Pros Premium has the tools to help you win. Unlock the most powerful fantasy tools in the industry. Don't want to wait for the giveaway? Sign up today at fantasypros.com/premium and start playing smarter, not harder. Now, Russ, there's, we always think of the prospects. Where the prospects going to go? Where the prospects going to go? But the NFL draft will impact a lot of players already in the NFL. And I'm worried about some of these running backs, because we've heard rumors swirling of, these teams maybe adding a vet or adding a back through the draft. And as we get to the draft, I just want to take your temperature here, 1 through 10, 1 being not worried at all, 10 being very, very worried about these running backs and their potential, about a team adding a big name next to them. So let's start out with the Cowboys and Tony Pollard, because everyone says it's Tony Pollard season, but Malik Davis is the only other running back with experience on this roster now. So they're definitely adding a running back in the draft, or, signing one immediately after the draft, something. They're going to add to this room. Are you afraid maybe if Bijan starts to slip, Dallas comes up for him and maybe puts him next to Pollard, and that would wreck all the Pollard love?
Yeah, if they ended up, right now, I'm keeping Tony Pollard as a 1, not being very worried at all. I love Tony Pollard. For my fantasy leagues last year, he kind of single-handedly saved and got me into the playoffs. But, with that, if Bijan ended up falling a little bit and he ended up going to Dallas, that 1 would probably turn into a 5 or a 6. But I still see them having a role for Tony Pollard regardless of who they draft. And I don't see them taking a running back too early in the draft. I mean, at least not in the first round, unless they ended up with Gibbs somehow. I could see that being kind of like a Jerry Jones type of move. But fun fact, Deuce Vaughn, his dad is a scout for the Dallas Cowboys. So maybe there's an interest there if they wanted to, bring in kind of a pass catching back. But overall, yeah, I would say it's a 1. And even if they added a Deuce Vaughn or if they added a Tajay Spears, maybe it would move, a notch or 2 down, but nothing too crazy. I would still draft Tony Pollard in the first round.
Yeah, I mean, it's really only Bijan and Gibbs and Charbonnet that would even threaten Pollard.
I would think so, yeah. The other guys, it's just kind of a committee type situation, and like probably no bigger a role than Ezekiel Elliott had last year for the Cowboys.
Exactly. So yeah, not much worried. How about Rhamondre Stevenson? Obviously picked up and was awesome last season, and Damian Harris is gone, so it looks like, hey, Stevenson is the man, but it's not usually the way that Bill Belichick operates with his RBs.
Yeah, I think that they could add a running back if they did. I mean, with them, it's probably a day 3 guy, whoever that running back might be. Maybe it's Eric Gray from Oklahoma. They've gone down that well before, but ultimately, it would probably be a 2 or a 3 for me on Stevenson. He's just been so consistent this past year. He's been probably the most consistent back they've had out of the backfield for quite some time. I mean, really the last 2 seasons. So I think it's going to be just fine for him as far as being a pass catcher. I love his running style. I love the fit for him there. And as they commit to the run, as they've shown over time, I mean, it's going to always help the quarterback. And I think they want to try to find ways to help Mac Jones. So if that's the case, I think Stevenson just, as a 2 or 3 there with being on the worried scale, I would still consider drafting him even in the first round somewhere.
How about Rachaad White with Tampa Bay? Because one of the favorite mock spots, because it gets, a running back. A lot of people are just out on running back in the first half of the first round. Completely understandable. They've been pushed back for sure. But Tampa Bay with no quarterback to draft here, unless maybe Hooker is around, seems like let's just add a guy that can carry the offense. Bijan is a huge mock draft guy to Tampa Bay. Are you worried for Rachaad White?
If they ended up with Bijan at 19, absolutely. I'd be like, okay, this is a 7 or 8. I could see him having some type of pass catching role a little bit, but even then, Bijan's a far better pass catcher in my opinion. So it just would depend on who it is. If they ended up getting Zach Charbonnet, I kind of like that fit actually, as I think about it. Like if they took him at like 50 or 52, whatever their
everything they wanted from Ronald Jones.
Yeah, right. I think even if they got Charbonnet, I'd be like, okay, White's more of like a 6 or 7 on the worry scale, but I would keep it probably around there, 6 or 7. Just really depends on who they get, and you really got my wheel spinning on it because I'm trying to think of like other backs that fit, and they're kind of a fun running back landing spot. Like come to think of it, for day 2 or day 3 of the draft, they got a ton of day 3 draft capital, so I could see them moving up into the 4th or even 3rd round to try to get a guy like a Spears, a Charbonnet, maybe even a Devin A-Chain or something like that.
I think that'd be like a Spears or an A-Chain would be a great combo with White. Mm-hmm. I think that would really fit with what they want to do there. That'd be fun. How about the last 3 I got here? Just if you have a worry about any of these guys, it's J.K. Dobbins. I just really didn't like how last year ended in him talking smack, and it just felt real weird. They also babied him, and he came back too soon. It was a weird year for him last year. Tyler Algier with Atlanta, who kind of just gained this role at the end of the year, and now we're all excited about him. And now, the betting odds right now in Vegas are Bijan to Atlanta. So a little worried about him. And then Rashaad Penny with Philly, because Philly has that number 10 pick, and Bijan is definitely an option there.
I will like to just say I want to take blame for Vegas and the odds moving up, because I think I was the first person to have the Atlanta Falcons taking Bijan. So I would just like to take blame for that. But I would say that those guys probably are all around the 8 to 10 range for me, because I'm just, if Bijan goes to Atlanta, Algier's a good compliment to him, but he's not going to be the featured back. And I think Bijan, no matter where he goes, if he went to any of those landing spots, he's a 300 touch type guy. I really do believe that. J.K. Dobbins, that's a 10. The guy can't run. I mean, we saw him last year trying to power his way through, but there's very little juice left for him. And maybe he's a between the tackles, goal line type guy, but other than that, I don't see the juice that he had when he came out of Ohio State. Rashaad Penny, he's kind of the same way. There's not really a lot of juice there. And I like the fit there with Philly, but ultimately I believe he's on a 1-year deal. So it wouldn't surprise me if they target a running back at some point. Maybe they get Charbonnet. And even then, I no matter who they add, Penny and Dobbins are 10s for me for sure.
Gotcha.
Yeah, Penny, I mean, that would be an 11 for me. I think they're absolutely adding someone.
I just don't like him. I don't like him, but like every time he plays, he's unbelievable. And it's like, oh, Rashaad Penny is one of the best backs in the NFL when you watch him. I don't doubt that. He is a very good back, but availability is the best ability is the old scouting trope, and
and they
he does
need
not
to
stay on the field. So I have 0 shares, and I will
They
never
need to keep him in the
Rashaad
committee.
Penny.
You know, they just can't give him the sort of like Chris Carson usage that Seattle wanted to give him because he's just going to, instantly be hurt.
Yeah, I'm with you. What do you got next,
Russell?
Fitzy?
Would you be shocked if Zay Flowers were to be drafted ahead of Jaxson Smith-Njigba? And just maybe you could also give me your overall take on Zay Flowers and whether you think, the Antonio Brown comps that we've heard, they seem to be a little far-fetched to me, but it's interesting that people would throw that name out there when talking about Zay Flowers.
I like the player. He's a vicious route runner, right? Like violent feet, and he's got a flexible lower half. The frame obviously is a little worrisome when you look at 5'9", 182 pounds, but he did put on 13 pounds going into the combine. You love seeing it. He carries it well. He still tested well. He ran a 4.42. I really like the player. I think he shows great tracking ability. And ultimately, I do think there's a shot that he goes as the first receiver. And I think, maybe even a team like the New England Patriots are at 14. They got to work with him at the East-West Shrine Bowl. They really loved him down there. And I think with the need there for another slot receiver or just another receiver in general, he makes a lot of sense there. But if they ended up passing, I could see, a landing spot there where he could go to a team like the Pittsburgh Steelers. I know it feels like they've circled in on offensive tackle and corner, but the need for wide receiver still is somewhat there, even with the weapons that they have. But beyond that, I think a team like the Kansas City Chiefs, I think that they're going to be active on draft day. I think that they're going to try to move up, and I think that that's who I have him going to because of a trade with Baltimore. So I think that that's ultimately what we see, something in that type of lens. So I like Zay Flowers. That the Antonio Brown comp I thought was very interesting, and I think it's actually a really good one. I think they are very comparable when you look at their style and just overall frame and size. So it wouldn't surprise me if he ended up having that type of production, and it wouldn't surprise me if he ended up being the most productive receiver in this class because he does seem like he's the dedicated workhorse and quote unquote, as I like to call him, the dog of the group. There isn't really like that lead dog or that alpha wide receiver in this group this year. But if I had to put some money on it, I would say probably Zay Flowers because he's showing he's putting in the work. He's running routes. It seems like every day there's clips of him running routes. He's putting in the work and the time. So I love seeing that type of stuff. And if he can keep his head on right to get that comp to AB, I think it's
I love that notion of him going to the Chiefs that you threw out. And I think you mentioned that the Chiefs have like 10 draft picks and probably are not going to have room for 10 guys on their roster. So that would be fun. I mean, let the mad scientist Andy Reid work with that kind of speed at wide receiver. That'd be a lot of fun to see.
We could watch all of D-Bro's enthusiasm for Sky Moore die live when the Chiefs select Zay Flowers on Thursday night. That would be a lot of fun. Fitz, is Zay your number 2?
I
know you like him.
He's
number 2 on a lot of boards, so I've
struggled with the debate about whether to move him ahead of Quentin Johnston, but technically I still have QJ ahead. If you were to put me on the clock in a dynasty rookie draft and it was between those two, man, that would be a violent internal struggle.
That would test your mettle right there, for sure. And Speaking of, let me tell you guys about Reality Sports Online. By now, most of you have heard of Reality Sports Online, the powerful fantasy sports platform where owners get to build and manage their fantasy team like an NFL general manager. But the question is, have you tried it? It's time to see what all the buzz in the dynasty community is about. Free agency, multi-year contracts, a rookie draft, multi-team trades, franchise tags, contract extensions, first-round rookie options, automated contract and salary cap functionality, and much, much more. Think it sounds complicated? It is not. The best thing about Reality Sports Online fantasy front office is that it doesn't take any more time than a standard league. It just requires more strategy. Think you're among the fantasy elite? Well, this is the platform to test your mettle. Still not sure? You can test out your general manager skills for free, FREE, in a mock today. If you like what you see, use the promo code FANTASYPROS to receive a 10% discount on your team or league today. Fantasy just got real at realitysportsonline.com. And just to mention, Fitz and I are going to be starting a league on Reality Sports right after the NFL draft. And if you would like to be involved in that, check out our Discord that we do every single Friday at 5 Eastern. Obviously on draft day, we won't have it, but we will have it every week moving forward after that. And we are gathering names up to potentially do a raffle or something like that to give away spots in that league. So please check that out on the Fantasy Pros Discord. Russell, I got a question for you because I have the exact same wide receivers in my top 5 in order that you do on your board. We're Jordan Addison guys, and we're not apologetic about it. I love Jordan Addison. I know it didn't test well. I know it came in a little shorter, whatever. All the negatives you want to put now, that is 15% of what they are to me. These thresholds and these numbers and all that stuff. The film shows a great elite wide receiver in Jordan Addison. I love him. Biletnikoff winner. Obviously, I know that there's potential for Pittsburgh to take him, even though they just traded for Allen Robinson, because Kenny Pickett is campaigning for Jordan Addison because they played together at Pitt before he transferred to USC. So I'm pumped on this guy. And it was one of those things where I was like, I don't think I'm going to take him off my board. There's a lot of guys that challenged, and there's a lot of great players, a lot of great wide receivers in this draft, especially at the top. Not quite the level of last year's draft, but they're still very, very good. What is it that edged out Jordan Addison for you over JSN? And I'm guessing it's just slightly. I think they're very close on your overall board, right?
Yeah, one's Addison's 17th on the board, and JSN is 20th or 21st. But with Addison, it's the route running. I mean, he's such a talented route runner, and he's so shifty, and that wins me over like 99% of the time. I love guys that can run stick routes, slant patterns, whip routes, and just lower their center of gravity, throttle down, sink their hips, and change direction. And he can do it. He's a menace down in the red zone. He's going to create separation with ease. And I think that's the key, is how consistent he is with creating that separation. Sure, he didn't have the blazing 40 time like we thought with he ran the 4.49 time. But his PR in the 100-meter dash was 10.85 seconds back in high school. Like, he has shown over the course of his career of being an athlete, he can run. And I'm not worried about a guy running in a straight line, to be completely honest, because how many times is a guy running in a straight line? Like, not very often. Like, they got to create separation. They got to get off press. They've got to operate in different ways, in and out of the slot, whatever it is. And I think he can do that. Now, I will say with him, he did have 20 career drops at Pitt, but he greatly improved that over his time with USC this past year. So I think there's a lot of intrigue with him of what he can do after the catch, and again, the short and intermediate areas of the field. So I love the skill set from him. He's slightly above JSN, and really it's just because JSN wasn't healthy this year. And I just wonder, lower body ailment injuries, they come back up down the road. Always. So I always wonder with that. And with him having that hamstring groin problem that he had, I think it could reoccur at some point for JSN.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Was JSN sitting out because he knew he was going to the NFL draft and he's going to be a first round pick and all of that? It's like, was this not as bad as it maybe we thought it was? So that does worry me about like the debate between those two. And when I say hands, I didn't mean catching the ball. Obviously, he's had a couple drops, which, number one, I don't care about drops in terms of fantasy unless that guy's getting yanked off the field for it. If he ain't getting yanked off the field, then I don't really care. Same thing with like Deontay drops the ball all the time. They're not pulling him. So I don't care about the drops. They happen, they suck, especially when it's a major play or it's in the end zone or something. Nobody wants it. But when I say hands for Jordan Addison, and this is what Zay Flowers did, and I've never seen anyone better than Antonio Brown at it. It's the hand fighting at the line when you're in a competitive situation to get the ball. Those guys can fight with their hands, and the big guys don't usually do that because they don't have to. They can body up, they can go up and get the ball. That's hand placement where you want your hands. But in terms of like giving a little shove and all that, I mean, Antonio Brown probably offensive pass interferes on every play, like, but they don't call it because it's so subtle. He's so good with it. It's such a nuanced thing, and I think Addison has that as well. So we're team Addison over here.
Yeah,
Fitz, where is Addison
so
for you?
I mean, he is, I think, number 4 for me behind Jaxson Smith-Njigba, Quentin Johnston, and Zay Flowers. But I agree that it's the route running that you have to look at, not the testing numbers. And, you know, Keenan Allen was really pretty slow in the 40, if I recall, when he was coming out. And, but, you know, the route running obviously has given Keenan Allen a pretty good career. And when they asked him last year about, you know, who he compared himself to as a route runner, and he said Picasso. And, you know, so Picasso's already been,
well, at least he's humble.
He's already been claimed. So maybe Addison can be the Renoir of route runners when he gets into the league. So Russell, speaking of speed, I mean, like Jalin Hyatt can obviously fly, but you've called Cedric Tillman, Hyatt's Tennessee teammate, one of the more underrated players in this draft. What do you like about Tillman, and do you like him more than Jalin Hyatt?
I do like him more than Jalin Hyatt. I think the thing with Cedric Tillman is that he's got this size at 6'3", 213, and he's got that prototypical X receiver mold where we don't really have a lot of X receivers in this draft. Like, you might be able to make that statement with Quentin Johnston, but we don't really know, and he can't really separate, and he doesn't always body the opposition. He hasn't shown it. Where Tillman, he shows great body control. He's able to high point the football consistently. In those 50-50 balls, he does a great job. So I think we'd be talking about Cedric Tillman more as a really early day 2 pick or potentially a back end first rounder if he would have been fully healthy this past year. He was dealing with the high ankle sprain in 2022. And there's some concerns with overall deep speed. I mean, a 4.53 is nothing to like, you know, ignore. I mean, there's some speed to his game, but he's very comparable to Michael Pittman Jr. And I think when you just look at him, he's going to be a guy that can win in hitch routes, comebacks, you know, those comeback throws on those back shoulder throws, those fade routes. And I think he can run slants over the middle or dig routes over the middle. So I think there's a lot more with Tillman as far as a route running perspective. And then just really his tape is a lot, to me, a lot more consistent than with Jalin Hyatt, where if you see some stuff from scouts, they're saying he's a kind of a one-trick pony. He's all speed, no brakes, no nothing. And it's like, that's true. I mean, he's a vertical threat. And there's a couple times on tape with Jalin Hyatt where you'll see him run maybe an option route or like a hitch route or something like that. And then a few plays later, he'll break one loose and go deep down the field. And he showed that against Georgia, but ultimately, like, there wasn't much else that he was doing. So I think that's my biggest concern with Jalin Hyatt is just there's all this speed, but we've seen it with these other receivers in the past. The speed doesn't always translate to just immediate success. You have to be able to run those routes, and you have to find your type of role. And we know speed has kind of been the thing in the NFL over time. Jalin Hyatt might just be a guy. I mean, there's probably going to be a team that takes him that already kind of has a player similar to him already on the roster because of all the speed that we've been seeing come to the NFL. Where Cedric Tillman, not every team has an X receiver. I think he can carve out a role right away.
You think Sky Moore and his lack of success last year has kind of made people afraid of the smaller guys like Josh Downs and Jalin Hyatt and stuff like that?
Possible. I mean, I think Sky Moore was a little bit different. Like, I watched him and I didn't really see it with him. I didn't understand the love with him, and the buzz he was getting, I thought, was very comparable to what we saw the previous year with Tutu Atwell. And I get Atwell's a bit of an outlier because he's 165 pounds.
Understand that pick at all. So
But yeah,
I was not in on Atwell at all. I was in on Sky Moore.
Yeah, I thought the buzz was very comparable in a way. Like those players just kind of came out of left field, and all of a sudden people wanted to take him in the back end of the first round. And maybe Sky Moore will do more with a better opportunity with Hardman gone, Juju's gone, stuff like that. But ultimately, I think each player is different. I think Josh Downs is different. He runs his routes at a different type of pace. And when I've often said the pacing of Josh Downs' routes are very comparable to Stephon Diggs. And I think the way he sinks his hips and throttles down and is able to change direction, I bet if you put them side by side, they're almost identical. And that's how I view Josh Downs, just a smaller version of Stephon Diggs that's going to operate primarily out of the slot in the NFL. And I think it's just a case-by-case basis where these guys end up. And Sky Moore might take off this year, but if he doesn't, then I think we might be able to have that conversation.
Yeah, and it's it's just the small guys or the slot only guys that people start to get worried about, because it is, Paris Campbell had a lot of, buzz going into the draft, but it was like he can only do one thing. He can only play in the slot. You press him at all, you give him any contact, he can't get off of it. And I think these guys are a little different. Because I like Cedric Tillman too. And people who are listening to this podcast, that's 2 weeks in a row, because Matt Waldman pumped up Cedric Tillman a bunch too. So it's made me go back and do a double take on Cedric Tillman. And I definitely moved him up my board the last week, because I'm like, man, Russell and Waldman. All right, let me go back and look at it one more time, just to check. And I did move him up. I think I have Hyatt a little bit higher, just because you can't teach that speed. And he can snap off a route like crazy. Reminds me a little bit of Marquise Brown, but Marquise Brown was a little disappointing for what we expected him to be in the NFL as well. My question is for the wide receivers here, Russ. Is there like a preferred landing spot you have for anyone? And it doesn't have to be any of the guys you mentioned. It could be, but is there anyone even deeper down the board where you're like, man, you just put this guy with this team, with this OC, with this quarterback, whatever it is, that you just really are excited to see?
Yeah, I've got two. I think Jaden Reed, if he ends up going to a team like the San Francisco 49ers, I love that fit. I know he visited with them. I think it would be a great fit for him, as he can do kind of a variety of things, whether it's in the slot or outside. I mean, at 5'11", 187, some would suggest that he's primarily going to be a slot receiver, but I think he's got A-plus tracking ability for his size. I think he's got the ability to run routes at all three levels of the field. And he shows, terrific run after the catch ability. So I think you put him in an offense that's designed by Kyle Shanahan, you can have a lot of fun there. And I think it would be just a great overall fit. And maybe I'm just being biased because I'm wearing a Spartan shirt. I don't know. I think Jaden Reed's going to be a hell of a pro. We'll see what happens. But the other fit would be Jonathan Mingo, and actually seeing him in Detroit. I think Ben Johnson, having a player like Jonathan Mingo, who would be by far the biggest receiver that they have on the roster because of just overall size. Like Marvin Jones is there, but he's 6'3", 198. You bring in a player like Mingo, he's 6'2", 220, and he's a versatile player. When he was in college at Ole Miss, he played as a running back. He played as an H-back. Like when I first started watching him, I thought he was a tight end. And then I'm like, oh, no, this guy's a slot receiver. Oh, wait, he's an X receiver. So he moves around, and I think Ben Johnson, Dan Campbell would have a lot of fun with a player like that with his size. And then he runs a 4.46. I think you can do some things with a player like that, whether it's, pre-snap motions with orbit motions and jet motions, or you can line him up as an X receiver, or like I said, you could even put him as an H-back, and he could, run to the flats or run wheel routes, and you throw that in there with Jameson Williams, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Marvin Jones. I think there's a lot to be desired with an offense that has a player like Jonathan Mingo.
Two quick follow-up comments before we get to the tight ends here. One is that I love that Russell is such a football nerd that, when we talk about ideal fits, rather than go someplace where, there are no good tight ends, like he is totally focused on scheme and coaching and who would be calling the plays, because, the two spots you mentioned, spots where there are already two pretty good wide receivers in place with Ayuk and Debo in San Francisco, Amon-Ra and J-Mo in Detroit. But yeah, schematically, those fit great, and great to hear that you had Mingo in mind, because I love the guy, man. I think one of the first times I ever saw him playing for Ole Miss, like he caught a pass and there were like 4 guys jumping on top of him, trying to pull him down. And like, he's still pushing the pile forward. I mean, it reminded me of watching Sterling Sharp going way back in my, the Packer days of like the late 80s, where I think Sterling Sharp was probably like the toughest wide receiver to tackle I've ever watched. And sometimes I get that sense with Mingo. Like, he does have a Sterling Sharp, Anquan Bolden, like, just try to tackle me.
DK Metcalf type
where
size.
He is just one tough mother to bring down once he gets the ball in his hand. So I liked hearing that.
Ole Miss Fitz is becoming wide receiver. Oh my God. And I mean, you got AJ Brown,
not just
and DK
wide receiver,
Metcalf,
you like big wide receiver, you Boggs. Like that is where the big alphas come from, man. I mean, they just seem to have a monopoly on those guys.
And in 3 seasons, Judkins, I don't know how much you got to watch of him, Fitz, the freshman running back
Zach
for Ole Miss.
So,
we're going to be talking about him on this show a bunch in a couple of years.
All right, Russell. So you talked about Michael Mayer at the top of the show, and obviously if you consider him a surefire first rounder in like dynasty rookie drafts, you're pretty high on him. Is he your favorite tight end in this draft class? And do you think he has a chance to be the best pass catching tight end, even though people have made comparisons with Dalton Kincaid being like a poor man's Travis Kelce?
Yeah, it's very close between the two. And I really wanted to have a first round grade on Dalton Kincaid, but the biggest downside was just him coming off the back. And I'm like, I think he's going to go in the first round, but I'm like, man, like coming off a back, you just never know. And I know, players like Gronkowski was able to play through back injuries and things like that, but he's a Hall of Fame tight end. I don't know if Dalton Kincaid's going to be a Hall of Fame tight end. We'll see. But that said, yeah, I think Mayer's the safe pick. I think he's one of the more overlooked players in this draft. I mean, to see a player that has been so consistent over the course of his career at 6'5", 250, he runs a 4.7, not a blazing speed, but I don't need my tight end to be the fastest tight end in the league. I need a guy to be consistent over the middle of the field. And I think he's just that, running stick routes, running out routes, running dig patterns. I mean, the crossing patterns, there's so much to be desired with him. And even if you go back 2 years ago, there's a play, I believe they're playing either Cincinnati or Toledo, Notre Dame was, but it was when Jack Cohn was the quarterback, and it's when he dislocated his thumb or whatever, and they're wearing the green jerseys. But Michael Mayer runs this stick route, and it's like the best route I've ever seen from a tight end before. And he has some juice for a player of his size. So I think a lot of people just kind of put him in this realm of like Jason Witten's or something like that. And it's like not sexy, just kind of boring, but I'm fine with that. If that who he becomes, like, perfect. So I think ultimately he's a first rounder. I think he's a top 20 pick. I think when you look at a team like Green Bay, he makes a lot of sense. I think a team like Washington, with Eric Bieniemy coming over there and how he values the tight end position, if he gets his hands on a player like that, we might be talking about Michael Mayer as maybe like a baby Travis Kelce. But Dalton Kincaid, I will say, is probably the best pure hands catcher in this year's draft, just consistently catching away from his body, only one career drop. And he fits the mold of the NFL tight end today at 6'4", 245. And it's because of his vertical threat ability. I think he can run routes vertically, and he can run routes over the middle of the field. So both those guys will go somewhere in the first round, and they very well could go, kind of back to back there, one at 15 and one at 16. We'll kind of see how that plays out.
Should we stop comparing tight ends to Travis Kelce? I mean, he's a unicorn. He's gonna go down as the best tight end in the history of the NFL. We should stop comparing guys to Travis Kelce, right? I mean, it's just absurd.
Fair. No, it's fair.
We've been.
I think.
I was just going to say, we've also been hearing those Jason Witten, Michael Mayer comps for quite a while too.
I don't mind that one. Jason Witten is a fantastic tight end, very good, always in the top 3 in terms of fantasy during his whole career. That's fine. But Kelce, Joe was running his RPV numbers, and Kelce is going to have the highest RPV of any position that he's ever done from this year, right? Like, he is on a different plane. So I just think we should stop comparing anybody to Travis. It's like comparing wide receivers to Jerry Rice. There's not another Jerry Rice. just, everyone's like, well, Randy Moss had better numbers. Yeah, well, they threw the ball 40 times a game with Randy Moss. They're throwing it 15 times a game with Jerry Rice, and he put up all these numbers. So, it's just, it's not apples to apples here. So that's too much Travis Kelce. I did it too. I looked at Musgrave and I'm like, man, I can see it. Because he can block better than Kincaid. I'm like, I can see it, but I, shouldn't do it. I think we should put a break on that.
Maybe throw a little more Kyle Rudolph out there or something like
that.
There
you go. Yeah. I mean, anybody else. You don't compare guys to Tony Gonzalez and Travis Kelce. So compare me to Antonio Gates. I don't care. Right. But the Travis Kelce one I think is just too much. But how about Darnell Washington? I mean, he is polarizing, and Fitz and I have had a hard time kind of like knowing where we want to put him in a couple super flex mocks that we did. Like, we know he's going to be on the field because his blocking is unbelievable. He's probably the best blocker if you put him in Cincinnati on the offensive line today, but and David Njoku got mired in that blocking role, and we saw more, production out of Harrison Bryant for a while. So is that the fear for fantasy with Darnell Washington, and what do you see his ceiling as?
I think that is part of the fear, and I also think just some of the injury history with him is what I fear for him. And I mean, when he gets to the next level, when he's running up the seam, which he does really well, he's going to take some shots. When he's running underneath, he's going to get upended. And there's going to be times he's going to try to hurdle somebody. He's going to get upended. I mean, and I always say this, and TJ Hawkinson broke me. No tight end should ever hurdle ever again. And if you make it as like your frequent go-to move, you're going to end up getting hurt. And Washington, he's shown that he can do it on tape. There's times he tries to do it a little bit too much. And at 6'7", 264, I don't need you jumping guys. I just don't. But right, exactly. But I think he's a big physical player. And like I mentioned with the injuries, he had a foot injury back in 2021. It kept him out 4 games. He had an ankle strain and a soft tissue bruise that occurred, before the college football playoff games, and that kind of limited him a little bit. So I think that those injuries can pile up, and obviously we'll see how it happens. But I love the fit to Cincinnati. I'm glad that you mentioned that spot, because I think it's a need. I know they brought in Irv Smith, but it's a need there, and I think continue to put weapons around Joe Burrow, compete in the AFC, try to outscore everybody, and when you can bring in that type of player, you can go ahead and have him block, like you mentioned. And I think that's the key. He's going to play early. And if he doesn't go to a place like Cincy, I'm very intrigued with a place like Las Vegas. I think Vegas at 38 was where I originally thought going into this draft was a perfect landing spot, even with Darren Waller. Now that Darren Waller's gone, the way that they value the tight end position there with Josh McDaniels, I think Washington would be a great fit there, especially with Josh Jacobs. He can block. And then when Jacobs isn't running the football, you can have him release up the seam or run an out pattern or a stick route or something like that, and he's going to be very efficient there. So I like the fit for Washington as a top 40 pick, and ultimately we could see Cincinnati or, like I said, Las Vegas.
Awesome. Yeah, it's going to be a fun draft. We're ready. We're 7 days away as we're recording this, so we're going to get there pretty fast. But remember to check us out on the YouTube, youtube.com/fantasypros for the first round of the NFL draft. We will be there breaking it down. The Fantasy Pros crew will be. Russ, thank you for coming on again. Please plug your Twitter. Tell everyone where they can find you and what you got coming up.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Russ NFL Draft. As I say on every podcast or radio, smash the follow button for me. But pretty much the only stuff coming up is Mock Draft 3.0, the final one that will be graded nationally through the Huddle Report and obviously through Fantasy Pros. Last year finished 9th. We're going to try to beat that. We're on a pretty good 2-year average, as I've been only doing those mock drafts for 2 years, so we'll see. But other than that, my draft guide released today. It's free to download. There's an article out there by me about 4 underrated players that weren't in my draft guide that I talked about: Rashaad Rice, Isaiah McGuire, some other players. So you can check that out. The guide is in there, and it's free to download. If you're feeling generous, you want to throw beer money to me, please don't. Just go ahead and click the 2 charities that are on page 2 there: Wounded Warriors Project and Ronald McDonald House Charities. Give back to the people that need it most. And then other than that, just more draft stuff all over at Fantasy Pros. And I appreciate you guys for letting me come on.
Of course. Great analysis. Great dude. Also, Russell, thank you for joining us. Fitzy at Fitz_FF. You can find me on the Twitter at Bogman Sports. That will wrap it up for us today. But please remember, check us out next week. We're going to be all over the place. So if you want to see us, you can find us on the Twitter for sure. But that will wrap it up for us. We'll see you guys next week. Take it easy, everybody.